A lone jet screams over a frozen Swedish forest, skimming the treetops at 500 miles an hour. It vanishes onto a stretch of ordinary highway. This was no ordinary airbase. It was a public road, hidden in plain sight, part of a nation's secret plan to survive a war alone. For 20 years, Sweden built the most advanced fighter jet in Europe and refused to sell it to anyone. But what if that had never happened? What if the Viggen had joined NATO's front line against the Soviet Union in the depths of the Cold War? One country built a fighter jet unlike any other on Earth and kept it entirely to itself. Sweden was neutral, surrounded by superpowers, and determined that if war came, it would fight completely alone. That isolation forged one of the most radical aircraft designs of the 20th century, the Saab Viggen. After World War II, Sweden watched Europe divide into two armed camps. It chose neither side. Neutrality demanded self-reliance. If the Soviets invaded, no ally was guaranteed to help. Sweden would need its own air force, its own weapons, its own aircraft. This policy had a name: total defense. Every road, every field, every forest could become part of the war machine. Eindien. By the 1960s, Sweden's air force flew the Saab Viggen, fast but limited. A new threat demanded a new answer. Sweden needed a jet that could dogfight, bomb and intercept, and land on a stretch of frozen road if its main runways were destroyed. In 1961, Saab began work on System 37, a single aircraft meant to replace 4 different jets at once. The requirement was staggering: strike, reconnaissance, interception and training, all from one airframe family. Saab's engineers chose an unusual shape: a delta wing paired with a smaller canard wing forward of the cockpit. This canard design was decades ahead of its time. It gave the aircraft short landing distances and remarkable control at low speed. On February 8, 1967, the first prototype lifted off from Linköping. Sweden had built something no other nation had attempted. At the heart of the Viggen was its engine, the Volvo RM8, adapted from a civilian airliner power plant into a supersonic afterburning turbofan. That engine gave the Viggen enormous thrust for its size, letting it climb and accelerate faster than most fighters of its era. But the true genius was the landing gear: reinforced struts and a thrust reverser that let the Viggen stop in under 500 meters. This meant the Viggen could operate from a public highway just as easily as a military base. A digital central computer, one of the first of its kind in a fighter, tied together the radar, weapons, and navigation systems. Test pilots pushed the Viggen through years of grueling trials, exposing flaws no design team could predict on paper. Engineers battled engine surge problems, structural stress at high speed, and the sheer complexity of the new fire control computer. Slowly, methodically, the aircraft matured. By 1970, the Viggen was ready to enter service with the Swedish Air Force. The AH-37 attack variant entered service in 1971, armed with anti-ship missiles designed to sink an invading fleet. Later, the J-37 interceptor arrived, faster, deadlier, built to stop Soviet bombers before they ever reached Swedish skies. Reconnaissance and training versions followed, giving Sweden a complete family of jets from a single airframe. Throughout the Cold War, Viggens shadowed Soviet aircraft over the Baltic almost daily, a constant, silent standoff. The Viggen served Sweden for over 3 decades, retiring only in 2005 after the Gripen took its place. The Viggen proved a small nation could out-engineer superpowers, building an aircraft tailored precisely to its own survival. Its dispersed basing concept, its canard design, and its rugged short-field landing gear influenced fighter design for generations afterward. And yet, for all its brilliance, the Viggen never flew in another nation's colors. Sweden's neutrality kept it home. Everything you have just seen happened. Now we step outside history, into a world where the Viggen crossed Sweden's borders. This is speculation, grounded in real engineering, real politics, and real Cold War history. What follows did not happen. In our alternate history, Sweden quietly loosens its export restrictions in the early 1970s, and NATO air staffs take notice. Or, of 4. After, the first real obstacle would have been the engine. The Volvo RM8 was derived from an American Pratt & Whitney design, bound by strictest export law. Washington would have held real leverage over any export deal, and likely demanded a say in who received the aircraft. In this timeline, the first customer is Austria, geographically exposed, historically interested in the Viggen, and eager for a capable interceptor. Next comes Finland, already a Viggen operator in real history for its reconnaissance version, expanding here into a full interceptor fleet. Then, the boldest step, West Germany, seeking a rugged strike aircraft that could survive Warsaw Pact air attacks on its bases. The Viggen's short-field landing gear would have been a perfect match for NATO's dispersed basing doctrine in Germany. Its anti-ship missiles would have reinforced NATO's northern flank, threatening any Soviet naval force moving through the Baltic approaches. But integration would not have been simple. NATO relied on standardized weapons, radios, and logistics. The Viggen used none of them. Spare parts, training manuals, and munitions would have needed costly adaptation. A real friction point in this alternate timeline. Politically, Sweden's neutrality would have been complicated by NATO sales, drawing sharp criticism from the Soviet Union. Moscow would likely have viewed any NATO-flagged Viggen as proof that Swedish neutrality was eroding, raising tension across the Baltic. Still, for the air forces that flew it, the Viggen would have offered something rare, a fighter built for survival, not just performance. Today, the ideas the Viggen pioneered live on in modern jets built for the same brutal logic of survival. The Gripen inherited the Viggen's short-field philosophy, its dispersed basing doctrine, and its instinct for rugged, self-sufficient operations. Modern NATO air forces now train for exactly the kind of dispersed operations the Viggen was designed around half a century ago. In our alternate timeline, that doctrine might have spread across NATO decades earlier, reshaping how the alliance planned for war. Could the Viggen have truly joined NATO? Technically, yes. Politically, it would have been an extraordinarily difficult path. American export law, Soviet reaction, and Sweden's own identity as a neutral power all stood firmly in the way. Yet the aircraft's engineering was good enough to matter. Had politics allowed it, the Viggen could have changed NATO's northern flank. In the end, the Viggen's true legacy is not the wars it might have fought, but the ideas it proved possible. The Viggen never wore NATO markings, but it remains one of aviation's boldest reminders that necessity, not size, builds greatness. Thank you for flying with us through this story. If you love aviation history, subscribe for more documentaries like this one, like this video, and tell us in the comments, which Cold War jet should we explore next? Until then, keep